The sun was barely climbing over the jagged ridges of the Arizona desert, spilling molten gold across the dry land, when the sound of a rope snapping through weathered timber split the still morning air. Rancher Caleb Whitmore, a man hardened by decades under the blistering sun and the untamed stretches of the West, was out tending his herd when he heard it. His instincts, sharp as the edge of a bowie knife at his hip, told him this was no ordinary disturbance. Heart hammering, he spurred his horse toward the source, a lonely clearing nestled between two rocky buttes, where the remnants of a crude gallows stood swaying in the breeze. There, swinging limply from a rough-hewn beam, was a figure so colossal, so impossibly strong in build, that Caleb's breath caught. She was an Apache woman, her dark hair cascading like a waterfall of midnight down her back, eyes half closed, her muscular frame swaying with the wind. Even in peril, she exuded an aura of wild majesty, a force of nature trapped by hatred and cruelty. Without hesitation, Caleb leapt from his horse, adrenaline surging, hands steady despite the terror gnawing at his gut. The rope was thick, coarse, and unforgiving, but he had faced death many times in the past. Carefully, he measured his steps, aware that any sudden move could snap her neck. Then, with a grunt of sheer effort, he slashed at the rope with his knife. The fibers screamed, tension released, and she dropped, hitting the ground with a grunt that was more fury than pain. Caleb immediately rolled her onto her back, checking for movement. Her chest heaved as life fought its way back into her lungs, and her eyelids flickered. "You're safe now," Caleb said, his voice low but firm. He had no idea who had done this, or why, but he knew she belonged here no more than a wolf belongs in a trap. He lifted her as best he could, though even with all his strength she was heavy, and carried her to the shade of a nearby mesquite tree. Her dark eyes opened, blazing with a mix of mistrust, anger, and gratitude. "You saved me," she rasped, her voice deep and resonant. "Yes," Caleb replied simply. "No one deserves this." Hours passed as he tended her wounds, cleaning the rope burns and applying the salve he always kept in his saddlebag. The Apache girl, though bruised and exhausted, never ceased to watch him, her sharp gaze studying every movement, gauging his intentions. "You're a stranger," she said finally. "Why would a man like you risk his life for mine?" Caleb shrugged, wiping sweat from his brow. "Because it's the right thing to do. I don't care what tribe you're from or what enemies you've made. A life is a life." She studied him in. Silence then. With a faint twist of lips, she allowed herself a small nod. That gesture, small as it was, felt monumental. The sun dipped lower behind the ridges, painting the desert in reds and purples. Caleb built a fire while the giant Apache sat, her legs stretched, her massive frame imposing even when seated. She had the bearing of a warrior, and Caleb, a man who had seen more violence than most, sensed it immediately. Yet tonight, she was vulnerable, and he felt a surge of protectiveness that went beyond duty. "I am Kaya," she said at last, the name rolling off her tongue like a chant of power. "Caleb," he replied, meeting her gaze steadily. "You'll be safe here tonight." Night fell, and with it came the haunting chorus of coyotes and the distant howl of wolves. Kaya stayed awake, vigilantly scanning the horizon, her fingers absently tracing the scars on her arms where the rope had dug deep. Caleb, noticing the tension, placed a hand gently on hers, a grounding gesture that Sapar eyed even him. She flinched, but did not pull away. In that quiet moment, trust began to stitch itself between two worlds, a man of the West and a warrior of the Apache. Before sleep could claim him, Caleb's thoughts churned. Who had left her there? And more importantly, what consequences would follow from saving her? The Apache were fierce, protective of their own, and her survival would ripple across the desert faster than wildfire. He knew that soon their chief would come, and he had to be ready, not as a threat, but as a man who had saved one of their own. The next morning, before the first light crept over the mesas, Kaya was already awake. She had fashioned a crude bandage around her shoulders and wrists, and her gaze was sharp, calculating. "We cannot stay here," she said. "They will come looking." Caleb nodded. "I know. I'll help you." She studied him for a long moment, then allowed herself a small, wry smile, the kind that spoke of gratitude, but also of an unspoken challenge. Together, they prepared to move, each aware that danger was no longer a shadow in the distance, but a storm approaching with the rising sun. By midday, the distant drumming of hooves sounded against the rocky plains. Caleb's heart sank, but he stood tall, hands resting near his rifle. A cloud of dust heralded the arrival of the Apache Chief, a man massive in stature, his regalia resplendent with feathers and beads that glimmered even under the harsh desert sun. He rode alone, and his eyes, dark and calculating, were fixed squarely on Caleb. "Who are you?" the chief's voice thundered, resonant and commanding. "What have you done with Kaya?" Caleb raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "I saved her life. She was left to die by men who hated her. I mean her no harm." The chief dismounted, his eyes never leaving Caleb. Kaya stepped forward, her presence monumental, towering above even the chief's expectations. "This man saved me," she said simply, her voice carrying across the clearing like a trumpet. For a moment, silence fell. Then the chief nodded slowly, a mix of respect and caution in his gaze. "You are brave," he said to Caleb. "And Kaya, you are alive because of him. But know this, the desert is full of enemies, and trust is earned, not given lightly." Caleb nodded, a bead of sweat running down his temple. "I understand. I do not ask for friendship, only to ensure she lives." The chief's gaze softened, almost imperceptibly, as he regarded both the man and the woman he had raised as a warrior. "Very well," he said. "Tonight we speak of what comes next. But know this, the bonds of blood and honor run deep in my people. You have crossed into our world, stranger. Treat it with respect, and you may yet leave it unscathed." As the sun dipped toward the horizon again, painting the sky in fiery streaks of crimson and gold, Caleb and Kaya stood side by side, aware that their fates were now irrevocably intertwined. Trust had been forged in fire and blood, and the winds of the West whispered promises of challenges yet to come. The desert was vast, unforgiving, and brutal, but in that moment a fragile alliance had been formed. A man of the ranches and a giant Apache girl, bound together by courage, honor, and the unbreakable will to survive. As night fell and the campfires flickered, Caleb caught Kaya's gaze one last time before sleep pulled at his eyelids. There was something there, a promise, a silent acknowledgement, that their story was just beginning, and the desert would never be the same again. The dawn cracked open with a pale, hesitant light spilling over the mesas, but the air carried a weight heavier than the desert sun. Caleb Whitmore, though accustomed to the hardships of the West, felt a chill creep down his spine. Last night had been a tenuous truce, the arrival of Kaya's chief a promise of both danger and judgment. Even as the wind whispered through the canyon, the distant cries of birds seemed to warn that the coming day would not be ordinary. Caleb adjusted the straps on his saddle, preparing for the ride that would carry them to the Apache encampment. Kaya moved beside him, her massive frame graceful despite the injuries she still bore. She carried herself with the same pride and fury that had marked her since birth, a force of nature undimmed by the near death she had faced. The chief had agreed, reluctantly, that Caleb could accompany them, but every step of the way, Caleb could feel the weight of countless unseen eyes, Apache warriors hidden behind rock formations, behind twisted trees, observing his every move. The desert had its guardians, and the stranger in their midst was a man whose courage would be tested beyond measure. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, burning the skin and casting wavering shadows across the desert floor. Caleb's horse snorted, tired from the march, but there was no relief. Finally, as the earth began to soften in the warmth of midday, the vast Apache encampment appeared in the distance, a sea, luster of lodges surrounded by fences of sharpened stakes. smoke rising in thin blue threads that danced with the heat. Warriors moved with purpose, eyes alert and weapons at the ready. Kaya walked ahead, her head held high, a beacon of defiance and strength. Caleb followed, careful to keep his hands visible, and yet ready should any misunderstanding arise. The chief rode alongside, silent, his eyes a dark mirror of judgment and curiosity. Upon entering the camp, the tension was palpable. Warriors paused their routines, children peeked from behind mother's skirts, and the smell of fire-cooked meals mingled with the scent of the desert. Kaya stopped at the center of the camp and turned to face her people. The silence that followed was heavy, electric, a hush that spoke louder than words. "My people," she said, her voice a roar that carried across the open space. "This man saved my life when others would have left me to die. Judge him as you will, but know this: he acted without hesitatio. Without greed, without malice, he acted with honor." The chief stepped forward. "Kaya speaks the truth," he said. His voice rumbled like distant thunder. "This man, stranger, has entered our world. He has broken no law, yet he walks paths most fear. Honor will guide what comes next." Caleb swallowed hard, aware of the scrutiny around him. Every movement mattered, every breath measured, and yet, as he looked at Kaya, standing tall among her people, he realized that this was not a moment of fear. It was a test of respect, of understanding, of courage that transcended bloodlines. Suddenly a figure stepped from the shadows, a rival Apache who had long harbored hatred for Kaya's family, his face twisted in malice, eyes dark with vengeance. "You saved her?" he spat. "You meddle in what is ours." Before Caleb could react, Kaya's hand shot out, her fingers gripping his arm. She moved like lightning, massive strength in every motion. With a roar, she stepped between Caleb and the threat, her presence enough to silence even the most defiant. "Enough," she commanded. "You will speak with honor, or you will answer to me." The rival's mouth opened, but the weight of Kaya's gaze and the silent, watching warriors froze him. Caleb felt a mixture of awe and relief. This woman, whom he had saved only a day before, was not only a survivor, she was a protector, a leader, a force none could easily challenge. The chief approached, placing a hand on Kaya's shoulder. "You have grown strong, child. And this man," he looked at Caleb, "may yet prove worthy of the desert's truths. But understand this: to live among my people, respect is the key. Betray it, and the desert will consume you." Caleb nodded, his throat dry. "I understand," he said. His words were sincere, but his mind was already racing. With the knowledge that danger had not left, they had merely stepped into a new arena where rules were ancient and uncompromising. Over the next hours, Caleb observed the rhythms of the Apache camp. Children ran laughing through dust clouds, women prepared food and wove intricate patterns, and warriors trained with precision, their movements honed from years of survival. Yet beneath the surface of daily life, Caleb sensed the undercurrent of tension, the silent promise that every visitor, every stranger was measured and weighed in the balance of honor. Kaya never left his side. Her presence was a shield, her eyes a constant reminder that trust had to be earned and respected. And Caleb, seasoned by years in the unforgiving West, found himself learning new lessons, not about survival, but about loyalty, courage, and the strength found in unity. Evening approached. The sun bled crimson across the horizon, and fires dotted the camp like a constellation fallen to earth. The chief called a company. Unsul and Caleb was invited to sit, not as a prisoner, not as a guest, but as a participant in decisions that would shape the future. The council began with silence, each participant aware of the gravity of their presence. Warriors and elders spoke of threats beyond the desert, of raiders, and of alliances that could not be broken. Then the chief turned to Caleb. "You stand among us, not as a man of our tribe, but as one who has proven courage. Will you accept the responsibilities this entails?" Caleb's heart pounded. He could not fully understand the depth of their world, yet he could see the trust offered, fragile but real. "I will," he said. "I will protect her. I will respect your people." A murmur of approval passed through the elders. Kaya's hand brushed against his, a silent affirmation of shared purpose. Caleb realized that their bond, forged in danger and blood, had become stronger than any oath he had taken before. That night, the camp celebrated with song and fire. Caleb sat beside Kaya, watching her laugh for the first time in what seemed an eternity. The desert around them was vast and wild, but in that moment, it felt like a place where anything was possible. The chief approached, sitting beside Caleb. "You have done well," he said. "Tomorrow the desert tests all who walk upon it, but tonight you rest, learn what it means to live among us, and you will survive whatever comes." Caleb nodded, looking at Kaya, whose eyes reflected both the flames and an unspoken promise. Together they had survived the hanging, faced the desert, and earned the respect of a people both fierce and noble. But the horizon held more than promises. It held challenges, confrontations, and battles yet to come. As the stars blazed above, a cool wind swept through the camp, carrying with it the scent of sage and fire. Caleb felt a strange calm settle over him, a knowledge that he was no longer merely a rancher but a participant in a story far greater than he had imagined. And Kaya, the giant Apache girl he had saved, was not just his companion. She was a force that would shape the destiny of the desert, and perhaps his own. The desert had its rules, its dangers, and its moments of beauty that could break a man or make him stronger. Caleb, for the first time in his life, felt the weight of responsibility balanced with the exhilaration of adventure. He understood that survival was not just about strength or skill, it was about honor, courage, and the bonds forged in fire. As sleep finally claimed him, Caleb whispered into the night, "Tomorrow we face whatever comes, together." And for the first time he knew that the impossible had already begun. A man of the West and a giant Apache girl, bound by fate, courage, and the unforgiving wilderness around them.